Good evening, and welcome to AJP's Closing Brief. Samsung Electronics delivered the largest quarterly operating profit in corporate history this morning, and Northeast Asia answered with its worst sell-off in weeks. It was everything the market said it wanted. 89.4 trillion won in second quarter operating profit, up more than 18-fold from a year earlier, a record for Samsung, and larger than any quarterly operating profit ever reported by any company, including Nvidia. The market sold it anyway. The question that crushed the region was not whether the quarter was good, but whether it was the top. Revenue came in below consensus, and Morgan Stanley, the same house whose 2024 memory winter call cratered Korean chips, published a fresh memory correction warning hours later. Korea, the epicenter, fell more than 8% intraday and triggered a circuit breaker before closing down nearly 5% at around 7,656. Japan's Nikkei lost more than 2% to around 68,257, with memory maker Kioxia down 11%. And Shanghai, the least exposed, slipped about 1% below the 4,000 line, its defensives barely scratched. Sell the news at maximum volume. Samsung fell nearly 7% to 296,000 won, around $194, despite the record print, and had been down more than 9% in the afternoon. SK hynix lost 6% to around 2 million, 201,000 won, about $1,441, and SK Square, the leveraged hynix proxy, fell more than 9% to around 1 million, 356,000 won, roughly $888. Foreign investors did the selling, a net 2.9 trillion won, their largest disposal of this streak in a 13th straight session, while individuals bought a massive 3.1 trillion won against them. Only one stock in the entire market hit its upper limit, and decliners swamped advancers. But look where money hid. Tobacco maker KT&G rose more than 6%, entertainment and cosmetics names gained about 5%, and refiners jumped S-Oil up nearly 9%. On the worst day in weeks, the market bought everything that has nothing to do with a memory cycle. Shanghai proved the day's point about exposure. The composite fell about 1% to around 3,988, surrendering the 4,000 level a real decline. But a fifth of Seoul's and the defensive trade that led Monday's session passed its stress test. Coal major China Shenhua closed essentially flat at around 42 yuan. Refiner Sinopec was also nearly unchanged at around 4.8 yuan. And Henguri Medicine gave back about 3% of Monday's near 5% jump to around 55 yuan. In other words, the rotation Chinese investors built out of pharmaceuticals, coal and refining a rally constructed deliberately around technology rather than on top of it, held its ground on the very day the regional chip trade broke. The weakness in Shanghai came instead from its own semiconductor and growth names following the Seoul tape lower. Tokyo took the hit through a single channel, memory. Kioxia collapsed 11% to around 72,400 yen, the sharpest fall of any major name in the region, as dealers read Samsung's slide as a verdict on memory pricing itself. Tokyo Electron dropped about 4% to around 69,470 yen, and Advantest lost about 2% to around 28,900 yen. The Nikkei finished down more than 2%, just over 1,480 points, at around 68,257. Yet the same split that defined Monday held again. The broader topics touched another record high early in the session as investors rotated into banks and beaten down value names before fading with the chip selling. For a second straight day, Japan's damage ran precisely as deep as its memory exposure and no deeper. Today settled one argument and opened a bigger one. The earnings are real, the best quarter any company has ever reported. What broke was the belief that the numbers still had room to surprise. Morgan Stanley says the memory correction starts here. Korean brokerages counter that supply stays short until late next year, and this is profit-taking, not a peak. 13 days of foreign selling say one thing, 3 trillion won of retail buying says the other, and after today, the gap between record profits and falling prices is the only number that matters. We'll track whether the selling breaks or extends in tomorrow's closing brief, with SK hynix's Nasdaq debut now 2 days away. If you find these briefings useful, subscribe and turn on notifications. Thank you for watching AJP.